In February 1862, two letters crossed Abraham Lincoln's desk that took him from the battlefields of the Civil War to an exotic faraway land. King Mongkut of Siam had written President James Buchanan, or his successor, to thank him for the gift of 192 books. By way of return, the king sent three gifts: a photograph of himself with one of his daughters, a sword crafted in Siam, and a pair of spectacular elephant's tusks. In addition to these, the king offered to send an additional extraordinary gift: elephants for the United States. The king had learned from an American Navy captain that elephants were not native to the United States, but that Americans would turn out by the thousands just to see their tusks on display at exhibits. The image of elephants roaming wild in American forests must have delighted Lincoln's sense of humor. However, in a letter dated February 3, 1862, Lincoln tactfully declined the offer. Now, on one level, writing a reply to the king and thanking him for the gifts would seem to be a matter of diplomatic routine that could be handled by the State Department with very little presidential involvement. Indeed, when he assumed the presidency, Lincoln informed William Seward that he would leave almost entirely in the hands of his Secretary of State the dealing with foreign nations and their governments. There may be cause to wonder whether Lincoln simply signed a letter written by Seward. However, a close reading of the letter reveals that while Seward may have drafted an outline of the letter, the tone and style of several passages definitely bear Lincoln's hand. The exchange between Lincoln and Mongkut occurred within the context of a relationship between the United States and Siam that stretched back to the presidency of Andrew Jackson. In 1833, Edmund Roberts, the American diplomatic representative to Siam, negotiated the Treaty of Amity and Commerce to promote open trade relations. The treaty was renegotiated in 1856 by Townsend Harris, who had been appointed consul to Japan by Franklin Pierce. When the Harris Treaty was ratified in 1858, James Buchanan had succeeded Franklin Pierce. On May 10, 1859, Buchanan sent Mongkut a letter and the gift of 192 books that arrived in 1860. The king replied on February 14, 1861, through two letters. By the time the letters arrived in Washington, Abraham Lincoln had been elected president. His letter to the King of Siam, February 3, 1862, was written in reply to these two letters. Lincoln opens his letter in plain, simple language. He writes, "Great and good friend, I have received your Majesty's two letters of the date of February 14, 1861. This is in stark contrast to the elaborate salutation in both of Mongkut's letters, which read in part, 'By the blessing of the highest superagency of whole universe, the King of Siam, the sovereign of all interior tributary countries adjacent, around, in every direction.'" And then he continues with the greeting and says, the letter was dated Wednesday, 10th night of waxing moon, in the lunar month of Vesak, the 6th month reckoning from the commencement of the cold season, in the year of Goat, first decade, in Siamese local astronomical era 1221. Lincoln must have been fascinated and amused by this language. The details about the Siamese calendar would have piqued his curiosity about foreign cultures. The plainness of Lincoln's salutation contributes to his image as Honest Abe. He does not attempt to exalt himself. Rather, his address puts the men on a level playing field. In addressing the king as his great and good friend, he conveys a warmth that is characteristic of his image as Father Abraham. Lincoln continues his letter by thanking Mongkut for the gifts, writing, "I have also received in good condition the royal gifts which accompanied those letters. namely a sword of costly materials and exquisite workmanship, a photographic likeness of your majesty, and also 2 elephants' tusks of length and magnitude such as indicate that they could have belonged only to an animal which was a native of Siam. This last phrase contains a trace of Lincoln's humor and provides evidence that Lincoln contributed to the writing of the document. Lincoln proceeds by responding to remarks made by Monkett regarding the exchange of gifts between heads of state. In his first letter, Monkett explained that he had misunderstood American protocol regarding gifts to the president, but that a recent communication had clarified the issue and that he was not offended. Lincoln replied, "Your Majesty's letters show an understanding that our laws forbid the President from receiving these rich presents as personal treasures. They are therefore accepted in accordance with your Majesty's tokens of goodwill and friendship for the American people. Congress now being in session at this Capitol, I have had great pleasure in making known to them this manifestation of your Majesty's munificence and kind consideration. Under their directions, the gifts will be placed among the archives of the government, where they will remain perpetually as tokens of mutual esteem and pacific disposition, more honorable to both nations than any trophies of conquest could be." The phrase "tokens of mutual esteem and pacific dispositions, more honorable than any trophies of conquest" has a distinct Lincoln-esque ring, suggesting his authorship. Lincoln transferred the care of the letters and gifts to Congress through an executive order recorded in the Senate on February 26, 1862. The final section of the letter addresses the King's proposed gift of elephants. Lincoln writes, "I appreciate most highly your Majesty's tender of good offices in forwarding to this government a stock from which a supply of elephants might be raised on our own soil. This government would not hesitate to avail itself of so generous an offer if the object were one which could be made practically useful in the present condition of the United States." He justifies his refusal of the gift by explaining that the geography and climate of the United States were not conducive to elephants. He says, "Our political jurisdiction, however, does not reach a latitude so low as to favor the multiplication of the elephant." Further, he points out that transportation in America was driven primarily by steam, stating, "And steam on land, as well as on water, has been our best and most efficient agent of transportation in internal commerce." Lincoln then promises to return the King's favor by sending him a gift. "I shall have occasion at no distant day to transmit to your Majesty some token of indication of the high sense which this government entertains of your Majesty's friendship." In March 1863, the State Department commissioned the American sculptor John Quincy Adams Ward to produce a pair of presentation swords for the King of Siam at a cost of under $1,600. The letter concludes, "Meantime, wishing for your Majesty a long and happy life, and for the generous and emulous people of Siam the highest possible prosperity, I commend both to the blessing of Almighty God. Your good friend, Abraham Lincoln." Lincoln's letter to the King of Siam is a brief document, but it's interesting for what it reveals about Lincoln's character and his presidency. At a time when he was immersed in the Civil War, Lincoln was capable of turning his attention to other matters. The quiet, gentle, good-natured tone of the letter is the voice of a president who has maintained his composure during a grave crisis. The letter is also of interest for what it reveals about how Lincoln chose to relate to an autocratic ruler. When Monkett describes his understanding of American government and politics, he writes as a student practicing his knowledge. Lincoln replies as a mentor, confirming and gently amending rather than criticizing or patronizing the king. The United States did not become a world power until the latter part of the 19th century. Nevertheless, there were foreign policy issues that confronted Lincoln's administration. The letter to the King of Siam provides a gateway through which we may explore those issues, as well as Lincoln's interest and expertise in foreign policy.